Zinogre, the only monster to rival Rathalos for flagship of the main series of Monster Hunter. He's one of the coolest and most awe-inspiring monsters to come out of the 3rd generation and probably still is to this day. Everyone loves him. He is a fan favorite around the world. In Japan, they loved him due in part to him being very akin to what they know and love in their particular line of culture. When he made his way over to the West, he set it on fire. People love this monster. They love his design, love his weapons, they love the fights, they love everything about this guy. There's really not a lot to hate about him. However though, I want to talk to you guys briefly about Zinogre and what he is and what he means to the series as a whole. I'm going to try and be as unbiased as I can about this, so even though he's not one of my favorite monsters out there, I'm still going to give him the praise he truly and earnestly deserves. So Zinogre debuted in Monster Hunter Portable 3rd. That was a Japanese exclusive PlayStation Portable game that nowhere else really got. It did get a revision, an HD revision if you will, but again, Japanese exclusive, and that revision was on the PlayStation 3. Now Zinogre was the flagship monster for this game, and this game essentially took place primarily in the Yokomo village. But Zinogre himself, he doesn't really seem to be a bad guy in the game, honestly, because essentially he was just doing his thug dizzle, hanging out in the Sacred Pinnacle where he usually lives, roughly around the Misty Peaks as well. But Amatsu, which is the Elder Dragon for that game, the big bad wolf for that game, if you will, no pun intended, because we're not talking about Zinogre, who himself is actually a wolf, kinda. But Amatsu was like, yo, move out, I'm taking over. So Zinogre started getting really close to the village, and hunters were deployed to go and hunt this Zinogre, and then the story continues as thus. Eventually you defeat the Zinogre, and you know, happy days and all. Regardless though, in the grand scheme of things, Zinogre is a thunder fanged wyvern. He's actually one of the first few fanged wyvern, but Monster Hunter World implements a lot of other fanged wyverns. So his implementation into Monster Hunter World, it kind of makes sense. The skeleton is there. There's a whole bunch of the monsters that share a lot of the properties that he does. So for him to actually be in World is actually fine. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense from a gameplay perspective. But for the most part, Zinogre, like I said, he did his debut in 3rd. In every single Monster Hunter game since then, he has made an appearance. He has a perfect attendance record right along that of Rathalos. Granted though, Zinogre hasn't been in the game as long as Rathalos, but given the chance, he'll be in there just as long. And that's what really stems from the fans. The fans really resonated with this monster. When they first saw him in Portable 3rd, they loved him to death. He was a great challenge. He was a fantastic monster. He had a weapon in every single class. He had armor that was amazing. He was just essentially a perfect monster. He was a perfect flagship monster. Not very many other flagship monsters are even close to this guy. Lagiacrus is one of my favorite monsters, but he honestly doesn't really hold a candle to him. When it comes down to it, as the flagship actually is, the only thing Lagiacrus really has going for him is the fact that in Monster Hunter Tri, they debuted the underwater combat. Lagiacrus was an underwater monster. Sure, he was really cool and everything, but essentially outside of being an underwater monster, it was a little bit more tougher than that of Gobel. Not a whole lot to go for. Zinogre gives everything you could ever want out of a flagship monster. He has iconic looks, he has iconic attacks, he has amazing theme music. It's just everything about him is great. So I can totally see how people love the guy. He was phenomenal in Portable 3rd. There was lots of really cool mechanics that was implemented when you first got to fight him. He actually has thunderbugs that float around his body that actually keep him nice and charged, because he can produce his own electricity, but he uses thunderbugs. Well, not really thunderbugs. Well, yeah, thunderbugs. I'm bugging. No pun intended. But he'll use thunderbugs to increase his electrical damage and his electrical powers. On top of that, you can actually, if you knock him over, you can use your bug net to gain Fulgor bugs, which is essentially like a special thunder bug. They tend to hold a symbiotic relationship with that as Zinogre. Zinogre is there being the big bad guy that he is, provides him protection, and the Fulgor bugs provide him with the energy. It's kind of a thing that works out. It's a really cool mechanic, and it's really cool to see that that's an actual thing that's implemented into the game, because if you actually knock Zinogre over, use your bug net to catch these bugs, he will actually go down a charge level. Now, Zinogre charges, okay? He is an electric-based monster. He charges by howling at the moon, or just howling in general. He has essentially 4 stages of charge. If you knock him over and capture enough bugs, you'll actually knock him down a stage. Heck, if you actually knock him over and capture a couple of bugs, you might even get him out of his enraged state. However, the charge level is only reduced by 1, but these bugs allow him to actually charge up. Now, another way to actually increase his charge, if you dare to do so, is to actually set a shock trap down. If you set a shock trap down and he's trapped in it, he will go up 2 charge levels, so it's not a good thing to do. Also, if he's actually fully enraged and fully charged up, shock traps don't work on him. Now, these are things that was actually implemented in the very beginning. A lot of these things, they tend to have waxed and waned. They might have changed. They might full on change. It might not even be the case anymore at all, as far as the capturing bugs off his back and then forcing him to go down a couple of charge levels, that kind of thing. But for the most part, when he was introduced, these things was actually really, really cool, because in the beginning, monsters, you would fight them and then they would die. That was seriously it. Zinogre was, I wouldn't say like the beginning to this, like the progenitor to all this sorts of thing, but I will say that he was one of the first few monsters that had a wholly different way of actually fighting. You didn't just run up and slap him, and he didn't just run up and slap you. There was levels to this, okay? There really were. There was multiple things you could actually do, different ways to actually go and about it. He would do the same thing to you, so you would think that you would walk in and just have your way with him, but he would say nay to such things. He was one of the first monsters to actually combo. He would feign hurt and then wake up with a tail whip into a backdrop. He had so many crazy different combinations he could do with most of his attacks. So to say that he wasn't a tough challenge in the beginning is an understatement. He was the challenge. I mean, there's not many things you can actually do to a Zinogre outside of really look at him and say, like, wow, he really did it. He has all there is. Now, on the opposite side of the same coin, Zinogre does have a subspecies, and it's a Stygian Zinogre. It was it was introduced rather, in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. And honestly, in my opinion, this is the Zinogre that I like. I don't really like base Zinogre, but Stygian Zinogre is the one that I do prefer. I do not believe we will get Stygian Zinogre in Monster Hunter World, simply because we already have Ebony Odogaron, which is essentially the same thing. But the thing that I like about Stygian Zinogre a little bit more than that of regular Zinogre is that, first of all, the shock trap thing doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter if you actually have to put the shock trap down, whether he's charging up or not. That is completely irrelevant, because he is not electricity anymore. He is dragon. By hanging out, I guess either hanging out, consuming the energy from Dracophage bugs, he has taken on a dragon element. Now, a lot of his attacks are pretty different, especially the ones that I'm going to refer to as elemental, the ones that actually use the element, the way in which he used to use the thunder. In this case, he'll use dragon. Now, the coolest thing about this monster, and the thing that I respect the most about him, is that in any Monster Hunter game where there's a monster that shoots projectiles, I guess you could say, if you can make very good with your zoning capabilities, that's when I believe you're going to be the real threat. A lot of monsters, they don't really have that. Zinogre himself doesn't really have it too much either. I mean, yes, he has projectiles, but he doesn't have a very good zoning game. Stygian Zinogre, he will place the dragon, I call them Dragon Balls, they're Dragon Phage bugs. Whenever he does this weird foot thing, he'll throw them out. He'll throw out 4 at most, but he'll have them float in midair, and then they will individually target multiple hunters or one hunter, and they track relentlessly, and they're coming after you. A lot of times, a lot of people actually fight this monster for the first time and get completely decimated by the attack. Stygian Zinogre is very good because he has the ability to do this, and then on top of that, he can walk off and do other things, making you think, okay, do I block the bugs or I block him? Is he gonna mix me up? Will I get crossed up because he actually went behind me? All these things you have to really think about, where in which regular Zinogre, the only thing you really have to worry about is just get out of the way when he throws the bugs off his tail, because that's essentially what they do. They go in a relative straight line, they kind of curve a little bit, where in these they will track you down, forcing you to actually be a bit more. You have to use your brain a little bit more, because it's all about spacing and exactly where you are in correlation to the monster himself, because if you're too far away, they'll snipe you out, but if you're too close, you might actually win because of certain luck factors. It's kind of wonky, but it makes you stay on your toes because you don't know what you're going to get out of the entire result doing parts of some of the abilities that it actually has. And I think the coolest thing that I actually didn't get footage for is his ability to strut. Stygian Zinogre will strut around flexing, okay? He will flex on you, letting you know that I am Stygian Zinogre and I am godlike. And when he struts, bolts of, I'm not gonna say lightning, but it's like dragon element. Bolts of dragon element rain out from the sky, and they will do damage. It's not necessarily an attack, but it's like, dude, look at me, I am godlike. Watch me flex. So I like Stygian Zinogre more for these things. He has a better zoning game, making him a bit more oppressive. And when it comes down to monsters, I like monsters that are probably more oppressive in a variety of different ways, as opposed to being oppressive in 1 or 2 different ways. Like a monster who only exclusively rushes down, like a monster like Tigrex, or in this case, Zinogre. Zinogre will hand slam you and then run at you relentlessly. That's his thing. He'll hand slam and he'll run at you, but he also has a different flash of combos and things like that. But for the most part, that's what he does. Since Zinogre has all of those, and then he uses his projectiles to do the same thing. But that's in Zinogre in a nutshell. This is Zinogre though, but for the most part, Zinogre himself, as he stands, he's a flagship monster that will stand the test of time. People love him to death. He's gotten new moves in World, I'm assuming, because that's kind of what I saw when I briefly looked at the trailer and then walked away, ya boy. But afterwards, I will admit that he has a lot of new things that's coming to the table and potentially could be something very, very interesting for all the new coming monsters as well. I figured he would have new things to begin with because a lot of the older monsters that I already fought, like the targets and Nargacuga, they have new attacks and new abilities and new, not necessarily mechanics, but different bits of AI. They would normally do one thing this way, but now they do it a certain different way that adds a different connotation to how they would do certain things. It's a little bit of a, like, you have to really know the monster to actually really see the subtle things, the subtle differences. But for the most part, guys, this is Zinogre. Zinogre is a flagship monster that the world enjoys. Everyone loves this monster. There's no reason to really not like this monster. He has a lot of tools that make people think, wow, he's probably the ultimate monster. That's kind of why people refer to him as the new flagship monster for this game, even though Zinogre himself is not quite the face of it, and Rathalos actually is. Since Zinogre's inception, the popularity contests and polls beg to differ. Zinogre is the fan favorite. But with that being said, everyone, this has been your boy Dak908, and my analysis on the flagship monster that is Zinogre. Is he the flagship of Monster Hunter, or is he just the flagship of the 3rd generation? I'll let you decide that in the comments. But with that being said, you all take care.